Michael Jackson was not just a singer. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of talent so intense that even the most seasoned music producers trembled under his presence. And yet it wasn't his voice alone that demanded attention. It was something far more terrifying, far more compelling, his perfectionism. The kind of perfection that could stop a session mid-take, make an engineer question their life choices, and push a room of gifted musicians to their absolute limits. No one knew this better than Bruce Swedien, the legendary sound engineer behind some of the greatest albums in pop history. Off the Wall, Thriller, Bad. Swedien once called Michael Jackson the most demanding artist in history, and he didn't say that lightly. Every note, every breath, every inflection had to be exactly as Michael imagined it, even if no one else could hear the difference. And if it wasn't right, he would start again and again until it was perfect. But what drove this relentless pursuit? Was it arrogance, obsession, or something far deeper? A terrifyingly beautiful combination of brilliance and vulnerability that no one else could comprehend. Imagine being in a room with the greatest entertainer the world had ever known. You are holding a microphone. The song is flowing. You think it's perfect, and then he stops you. He shakes his head. "Not like that," he says. And you realize this session will last until he hears exactly what he imagined. Some say that working with Michael was maddening. Some say it was exhilarating. But all agree on one thing: you never left the studio unchanged. By the end of a session, your senses were sharpened, your patience tested, and your very understanding of music expanded. And while some walked away exhausted, bruised by obsession, Michael Jackson walked away smiling, knowing that every sound, every rhythm, every breath in the room was exactly as he dreamed. And yet, behind this aura of perfection was a story few have told. A story of childhood training, unrelenting ambition, and a rare mind that demanded more than ordinary human endurance. Michael's genius was inseparable from his obsession, and Bruce Swedien, perhaps more than anyone, lived at the heart of it. But the question remains: how did a man so small in stature command such monumental devotion from those around him? How did a boy from Gary, Indiana, grow into the perfectionist who could make legends feel inadequate? And perhaps most importantly, what price did he and everyone who worked with him pay for that perfection? The answers lie in the studio, in the hours that stretched into days, in the hundreds of takes, and in a pursuit so intense it could almost be considered inhuman. Michael Jackson's voice was no ordinary gift. It was a weapon, a shield, a beacon. From the earliest recordings with the Jackson 5, his vocal control stunned anyone who heard it. He could move from a whisper to a scream with absolute precision, threading raw emotion into every note. It wasn't just talent, it was mastery, but mastery alone doesn't create perfection. And Michael, even in his earliest days, knew that. Every recording, every rehearsal, every performance was a laboratory. He dissected sound in ways most artists couldn't imagine. A single syllable could be stretched, shaped, and perfected until it resonated exactly as he heard it in his mind. Contrast this with the industry standard. Most singers were praised for hitting the right notes, for delivering emotion, for capturing the moment. Michael wanted more. He wanted immortality in sound. Each note had to be flawless, not just technically, but emotionally, spiritually, and universally. It was this relentless drive that would define his career, and it would terrify anyone who entered his studio. Musicians who had played with legends before would find themselves challenged in ways they had never imagined. Engineers who had worked with the best discovered a new level of rigor. Michael Jackson demanded excellence, not as a request, but as a law of nature. And yet behind this perfectionism, there was genius. Because in demanding the impossible, Michael unearthed sounds no one else could hear, phrasing no one else could imagine, emotions no one else could capture. The world heard hits, but the studio heard battles. Each song was a battlefield. And Michael, every time, emerged victorious, not because he was infallible, but because he would not accept anything less than perfect. The question, however, remained: what drove this obsession? Was it fear? Was it a childhood spent under the exacting eyes of his father? Or was it a hunger to be remembered not as a pop star, but as something beyond human, a musical deity whose work would stand the test of time? And as the studio sessions grew longer, the demands grew greater. A single phrase could take hours. A single chorus could stretch over dozens of takes. Yet those who stayed with him discovered that each repetition brought them closer, not just to a perfect recording, but to understanding the mind of Michael Jackson itself. By the end of a session, those who survived it could feel it, the pulse, the heartbeat, the life in the music. And those who left, exhausted and frayed, still carried a sense of awe. Michael Jackson didn't just sing. He transformed sound into an experience, and every engineer, every musician, every producer in that room was a witness, and often a victim, of his obsession. And yet this was only the beginning. The real story of his perfectionism wasn't in the songs the world heard. It was in the hours of struggle behind the hits. The obsession that would define him, challenge those around him, and eventually create some of the most iconic music in history. Michael's perfectionism didn't appear out of nowhere. It was forged in the fires of childhood, shaped by the relentless ambition of his father, Joe Jackson, and honed in the spotlight of the Jackson 5. From the very beginning, excellence was non-negotiable. Mistakes were not just errors, they were failures to be corrected, sometimes painfully. Rehearsals in the Jackson household were famously brutal. Songs were repeated over and over. Every note had to land perfectly. Every step, every gesture, every nuance had to be executed flawlessly. Joe Jackson demanded discipline, and Michael absorbed it. Not as resentment, but as a blueprint for greatness. It wasn't just technique, it was mindset. Michael learned that talent alone could carry you only so far. True artistry required control, obsession, and vigilance. And while his siblings sometimes struggled under these demands, Michael thrived. He internalized the standards set before him, but he didn't stop there. As he matured, he raised the bar higher, higher than anyone else thought possible, even higher than his father had imagined. By the time he began recording solo albums, Michael had become a student and master of perfection simultaneously. His childhood rehearsals had instilled a discipline few artists would ever know. But discipline alone couldn't satisfy him. He needed innovation. He needed sound that transcended ordinary comprehension. This early training would manifest in the studio as both brilliance and terror. Engineers and musicians would recount sessions stretching late into the night, where even minor imperfections could trigger a reset, a retake, a reimagining of the song. And yet, in every repetition, in every correction, Michael's genius revealed itself. The obsession was not arbitrary. It was the engine that created art that would echo through generations. But there was a cost. Childhood discipline, while making him unstoppable in the studio, also left him with a mind that never rested. Even success did not satisfy him. Every take could be improved. Every rhythm could be sharpened. Every note could be more perfect. And so the boy who once rehearsed tirelessly under his father's gaze became the man who demanded the impossible from the best in the industry. And the world would hear the results. But few would ever truly understand the sacrifice, the discipline, and the obsession that lay behind the music. Yet, the question lingered, as his childhood shaped his obsession. How would this perfectionism interact with the genius of those he worked with? Could anyone endure it? And if so, what would be left behind when the music finally played? It was a question Bruce Swedien would face head-on as he stepped into the studio with Michael Jackson, a question that would test his skills, his patience, and ultimately, his understanding of what genius truly demanded. When Michael Jackson stepped into a studio, the world didn't just listen, he demanded it bend to his will. But to capture that sound, he needed someone extraordinary. Enter Bruce Swedien, a man whose reputation for sonic precision was unmatched. Known for his meticulous approach and uncanny ability to capture the human voice in ways that seemed impossible, Swedien had engineered records for legends, but nothing, or no one, had prepared him for Michael Jackson. The first time they met, Swedien recalls he was confronted with a paradox. Michael was both exacting and enigmatic, gentle yet unyielding. Every session began with a quiet intensity that seemed innocent at first, but soon revealed itself as something far more demanding. Michael didn't just want the music to sound good. He wanted it to breathe, to move, to speak with an intimacy that transcended the studio walls. For Swedien, this was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had worked with perfectionists before, but Michael's obsession was a force of nature, relentless and consuming. A simple recording session could stretch into hours, even days. Every note had to be placed with exacting precision. The tone, the phrasing, the subtle breaths between words. Michael monitored them all, not as suggestions, but as laws of the recording universe. It was during these early sessions that Swedien realized the truth about Michael's genius. He didn't just hear music, he felt it in ways that defied logic. He could detect minute imperfections that escaped even trained ears, and when he found them, he wouldn't stop until they were gone. "It's not just about singing," Michael would say. "It's about telling the story in every sound." And so the studio became a crucible. Swedien, armed with decades of experience, found himself being tested in ways no engineering manual could prepare him for. Some nights ended with breakthroughs so profound that they redefined what a recording could be. Other nights ended with exhaustion and frustration as Michael pushed past limits that few could endure. Yet Swedien stayed. Why? Because amidst the obsession lay moments of pure, transcendent brilliance. When Michael finally heard what he wanted, it wasn't just a note or a phrase, it was magic. And Swedien, who had captured countless hits, recognized that he was witnessing something rare. The mind of a man who demanded perfection, and the artistry that came when it was finally achieved. But not every engineer could survive this. Michael's methods were intense, sometimes maddening, and often misunderstood. Many walked away, frustrated or exhausted. Those who stayed had to surrender to his vision, not just follow it. And for Swedien, surrendering wasn't a compromise. It was an entrance into the mind of a genius, a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about sound, artistry, and human potential. And yet, the question lingered. What would happen when the stakes rose even higher? When Michael's perfectionism collided with the most ambitious project of his career? The answer would come in a studio in 1982, during a session that would forever change music. History. The year was 1982, Michael Jackson was working on an album that no one could have imagined would redefine pop. Music. Thriller. The stakes were astronomical. And in the studio, perfection was not a goal. It was a battlefield. Every track on Thriller was a testament to Michael's obsession with sound. Bruce Swedien recalls the meticulous nature of their sessions. Every instrument, every beat, every vocal inflection scrutinized, dissected, and reconstructed until it reached a level of clarity that was almost supernatural. Michael didn't just want a hit, he wanted immortality etched into every measure. Take Billie Jean, for example. Swedien describes the vocal sessions as both exhausting and exhilarating. Michael would ask for takes that lasted hours, sometimes repeating a single phrase dozens of times. Not because he couldn't sing it, but because he knew there was something more hidden in the sound. A subtle rhythm, a whisper, a nuance that would elevate the track from great to transcendent. The studio became a theater of extremes. At times, the sessions were calm, almost serene, as Michael tested vocal textures and experimented with phrasing. At other times, they erupted into intensity as he demanded more, sharper, purer, better. Musicians and engineers found themselves both terrified and inspired, caught in a whirlwind of brilliance they could barely comprehend. And it wasn't just the vocals. Michael obsessed over every detail: drum patterns, guitar tones, keyboard layers, even the slightest echo in the room. He listened with a precision that bordered on supernatural, identifying imperfections invisible to the human ear. And when he found them, he demanded they be corrected no matter how long it took. Swedien, seasoned as he was, learned quickly that patience alone was not enough. To work with Michael, he had to become attuned to his mind, to anticipate his vision, to understand the perfection he sought before he even asked for it. He wasn't just recording music, Swedien says. He was sculpting sound with the same care a painter gives to every brushstroke. And every detail mattered. Yet amidst the relentless demands, there was magic. In those moments of obsession, the music came alive. Tracks that could have been ordinary were transformed into something timeless, ethereal, unforgettable. Michael's perfectionism was not cruelty. It was devotion to art, a relentless pursuit that pushed everyone in the room to greatness. And yet the pressure was immense. Not everyone survived it. Some engineers left frustrated, musicians collapsed from exhaustion, and even Swedien admits there were nights when he doubted whether any human could endure Michael's intensity. But those who persevered witnessed history being made. They saw the alchemy of obsession and genius, the moment when human effort met supernatural artistry, and the result was an album that would dominate charts, redefine a genre, and set a new standard for music worldwide. But even Thriller, despite its perfection, only scratched the surface of Michael's obsession. There were sessions that no one would ever hear, details that were perfected yet invisible, moments of near madness that birthed music that still astonishes the world today. And behind it all was the question that haunted every session. How far would Michael go to achieve the sound he heard in his mind, and what price would everyone else pay along the way? This question would only deepen in the sessions to come, as Michael pushed beyond the limits of ordinary human endurance, challenging Swedien and the entire team to follow him into uncharted territories of musical perfection. In the world of music, a single take can make or break a song. For most artists, 3 or 4 takes are considered more than enough. For Michael Jackson, 100 was sometimes the starting point. Bruce Swedien recalls sessions where the sheer repetition was almost incomprehensible. A single vocal line could be sung, replayed, and recorded dozens of times, each iteration dissected with relentless scrutiny. Why? Because Michael could hear what no one else could. The hidden pulse beneath the rhythm, the ghost of a note that hovered just outside perception. If it wasn't perfect, if it didn't breathe with the life he imagined, it didn't exist. And in his mind, only perfection could transform a song from ordinary to eternal. Musicians and engineers quickly learned that patience was the price of admission. Every instrument had to align, every breath, every subtle inflection, every micro-pausing of sound had to be exact. When Michael said again, it was not a casual request, it was a command that carried the weight of obsession. There's a story from the recording of Wannabe Startin' Something, where Michael asked the backup singers to repeat a section for hours. Each time he would detect the slightest imbalance in timing or tone and insist they start over. Some grew frustrated. Some walked away. But those who remained eventually achieved something extraordinary. A harmony so intricate, so alive that even decades later it still sounds fresh, as if it were performed yesterday, and it wasn't just repetition. It was experimentation. Michael often asked for subtle changes in phrasing, tone, or timing, not because the previous take was wrong, but because he knew there was something more hidden in the sound. Every retake was a journey toward discovery. Bruce Swedien would find himself anticipating Michael's adjustments before they were even articulated, learning to think and hear in tandem with a mind that seemed to operate on a level beyond ordinary human comprehension. Yet the human cost was immense. Long hours, near-obsessive scrutiny, endless retakes. Some nights ended with musicians exhausted, voices hoarse, fingers sore, and spirits frayed. And still, Michael demanded more. And still, Swedien stayed, not out of obligation, but because he recognized that in those hours of madness lay moments of magic no one else could create. There was a beauty in it, a terror too, but it was the kind of beauty that could only come from obsession. And Michael Jackson, in his relentless pursuit of perfection, created music that would endure far beyond the limits of time, memory, and expectation. But even after 100 takes, even after hours of precision and discipline, a question lingered. How much longer could those around him keep up? And what price would perfection demand next? Michael Jackson didn't just want a perfect recording. He wanted a sound that had never been heard before. And to achieve it, he broke every rule of conventional studio engineering. Bruce Swedien recalls moments where Michael insisted on microphone placements that defied logic, vocal layering that seemed impossible, and timing adjustments so subtle they barely registered to anyone else. He was relentless. If a standard recording technique didn't serve his vision, he discarded it. If a sound engineer said it couldn't be done, he found a way. Michael's obsession wasn't just with notes, it was with the texture, the emotion, and the invisible threads connecting every sound. And if it took hours or days, he would stay, demanding that every element align perfectly. One famous technique Swedien described was the acoustic doubling of vocals, a process that Michael demanded to create depth and clarity unheard of in pop music. Each layer required absolute precision. Even the tiniest discrepancy could ruin the harmony. Michael listened not just with his ears, but with his imagination, hearing the song as it would feel in a theater, in a living room, in the heart of a listener he had never met. It was innovation under pressure. Where others might have seen limitation, Michael saw opportunity. A minor imperfection was not a flaw, it was a challenge, a chance to push sound into new territory. Drums were repositioned, echoes were manipulated, harmonics were studied and adjusted. Michael treated every studio session like a laboratory, every take like an experiment, and every failure like a step closer to genius. Yet this relentless pursuit came at a price. Some engineers questioned his sanity. Musicians sometimes despaired. Even Swedien admits there were moments when he wondered if anyone could survive Michael's demands and remain sane. And yet the results were extraordinary. Songs like Thriller, Beat It, and Billie Jean weren't just hits, they were sonic revolutions. They redefined pop music and set standards that still influence recording studios today, but there was more than innovation at stake. Michael's obsession created tension, drama, and even fear in the studio. A misplaced beat, a slightly off note, or a phrase sung too quickly could ignite frustration. And yet, he demanded loyalty, patience, and devotion from every person in that room. The studio became a crucible of discipline and creativity, pushing everyone to the very edge of their abilities. And through it all, the question loomed. What would it take to satisfy Michael Jackson completely? What combination of sound, emotion, and technical perfection could finally match the vision in his mind? For those who dared to stay, the answer was as elusive as it was intoxicating. In breaking the rules, Michael Jackson not only created music that would endure forever, but he also tested the limits of human collaboration, endurance, and imagination. Every engineer, every musician, every producer who worked with him came away transformed, exhausted, and in awe, knowing that the price of brilliance was sometimes fear, sometimes obsession, but always genius. And yet, even as the albums became legendary, the sessions grew more intense, the stakes higher. For Michael, perfection was not a destination, it was a journey. And the world would never hear the full extent of what went into crafting the sounds that defined a generation. What remained hidden behind the perfection, the exhaustion, the obsession, the near madness, would only reveal itself in the most iconic moments of his career. Moments that would shock, inspire, and forever cement Michael Jackson as the most demanding, brilliant, and unforgettable artist in history. Even for a genius, the pursuit of perfection can create friction. Michael Jackson was a visionary, a musical architect whose imagination seemed limitless. But brilliance rarely coexists easily with others' expectations. For Bruce Swedien and the countless musicians and engineers who entered his studio, working with Michael could be exhilarating, terrifying, and exhausting, sometimes all at once. Conflict was inevitable. Sessions could erupt into tension without warning. A slight misalignment of rhythm, a vocal phrasing that Michael felt lacked life, or a minor technical glitch could spark a pause, a discussion, or even a storm. Yet these conflicts were not mindless. They were part of the creative process, an unspoken negotiation between human limitation and artistic vision. Michael's standards were absolute, and he demanded that everyone around him rise to meet them. But he was also patient in ways few would recognize. When someone struggled to understand his approach, he would demonstrate, guide, and insist, sometimes for hours, until the team could match his vision. Swedien recalls nights where frustration threatened to consume the room. Musicians whispered about walking away. Engineers questioned if it was worth the effort. And yet Michael's presence had a magnetic pull. His passion for music was infectious. Those who endured found themselves pushed beyond ordinary capabilities. What seemed impossible became achievable. And in the tension of conflict, innovation was born. Take, for instance, the recording of Thriller. There were moments when Michael's perfectionism and the band's natural rhythm clashed. One evening, after hours of retakes, Michael stopped the session. Silence filled the room. Then, in a voice quiet yet firm, he explained his vision, how the music should feel in the listener's chest, not just their ears. Something shifted. What had been discord turned into harmony. The result? A track that became a cultural phenomenon, but the process was rarely smooth. Conflicts forced compromises, both from Michael and his collaborators. Sometimes Michael had to adjust his expectations, learning to trust that the brilliance of others could complement his vision. And sometimes those around him had to stretch far beyond their comfort zones, adopting Michael's intensity, hearing what he heard, and seeing what he saw in ways that seemed almost supernatural. Yet, every compromise, every resolution came at a cost. Exhaustion, stress, and even moments of doubt became routine. And still, Michael pressed on, unyielding, unstoppable. The tension created art that was perfect, precise, and utterly transformative, but the human toll was evident. And as the sessions grew longer and more ambitious, the stakes rose. Could anyone truly keep pace with Michael Jackson? Could the team survive the collision of genius and obsession without being broken by it? The answer lay in the next phase of creation, a place where sound, emotion, and relentless demand would meet in ways no one had ever experienced before. Michael Jackson's obsession with sound was legendary, but to truly understand it, one had to enter his world and see the music through his ears. Every session, every take, every breath mattered, and the closer you came to his vision, the more you realized that obsession was not mere stubbornness, it was a pathway to something extraordinary. Bruce Swedien describes moments where Michael would listen to a playback and instantly detect subtleties invisible to anyone else. The tilt of a note, the resonance of a drum, the barely perceptible rhythm of a bass line. These details could mean the difference between a good take and a transcendent one. And if they weren't perfect, Michael would stop the music, often without anger, but with an intensity that left everyone aware of the stakes. Every element of a song was scrutinized. The layering of vocals, the placement of instruments, even the tiny echoes in the room, nothing escaped his attention. He demanded clarity not just in sound, but in emotion, insisting that listeners feel the music in their bodies, in their hearts, in ways they couldn't consciously describe. This obsession drove innovation. Techniques were invented, sounds were experimented with, and rhythms were perfected beyond the standards of the industry. Swedien and the engineers discovered that ordinary approaches would never suffice. Michael pushed them into unexplored territories of recording, some so subtle that decades later, musicians are still trying to replicate them. Yet, obsession came with its shadows. Sessions could stretch for hours, sometimes days, testing patience and stamina. Musicians often left with exhaustion etched into their bodies, voices worn raw, fingers sore from repeated precision work. And still, Michael pressed on, driven by a vision that only he could hear fully, but that everyone in the room felt deeply. What made Michael's obsession so compelling was its intimacy. It wasn't just technical, it was emotional. He could take the smallest inflection, the slightest hesitation, and turn it into a conduit for human feeling. Every retake, every adjustment, every repeated phrase was a pursuit of an emotional truth, an attempt to connect with listeners in ways that transcended ordinary music. There are stories of Michael isolating himself with Swedien late at night, listening to a single take repeatedly until they captured the exact nuance he sought. No one else was allowed in. No distractions. The world outside vanished. In those hours, sound became more than music. It became life, obsession, and devotion all at once, and yet the world never fully sees this side of Michael Jackson. When fans listen to Thriller, Bad or Dangerous, they hear the perfection, but they do not hear the sacrifice, the struggle, or the human cost behind it. Every song was the result of hours of trial, near madness, and a single-minded pursuit of the impossible. The question remained, how far could Michael push before the obsession became unbearable? How much could those around him endure before breaking? And what would emerge when genius and obsession collided at the very peak of human creativity? The answers, like every note Michael perfected, lay just out of reach, waiting for the next session. The next take, the next moment when sound, emotion, and obsession would converge in a way no one could predict. Michael Jackson's obsession with perfection did not end when the studio lights dimmed. In fact, it often intensified beyond the walls of recording booths, echoing through every stage, every rehearsal, and every music video he created. For Michael, music was not merely an art, it was a total experience, a world he could sculpt with exacting precision. His choreography was legendary, but it was an extension of the same meticulousness that defined his studio work. Every moonwalk, every spin, every subtle gesture was honed until it felt effortless, even though behind the scenes it demanded hours of repetition, correction, and reinvention. Michael saw the world as a stage, and the human body as an instrument no less precise than a violin or a vocal cord. Music videos, too, became laboratories of perfection. Thriller's iconic sequences were not only revolutionary in narrative and cinematic design, they were exercises in discipline. Michael demanded that his movements, expressions, and timing align with every beat, every rhythm, and every subtle sonic flourish. Even small details, a finger twitch, a gaze, a pause, were measured against his exacting standards. Yet, beyond the choreography and the visuals, there was an emotional core. Michael sought connection, not just performance. He wanted audiences to feel every nuance of the music and to experience the story as vividly as if it were their own. This meant pushing everyone around him, dancers, directors, engineers, musicians, to their absolute limits. Some broke under the pressure. Others rose to heights they never imagined. There are accounts from his live performances where Michael would request dozens of rehearsals for a single sequence, asking the band to repeat a riff, the dancers to restart a move, and the lighting team to adjust a single shadow. Every iteration was a test of endurance, a negotiation between human limitation and his vision of perfection. And yet the results were nothing short of mesmerizing. Audiences witnessed a spectacle that felt effortless, magical, and timeless. Few realized the sacrifice and obsession that made it possible. Even behind the camera, Michael's exacting nature caused tension and awe. Directors and crew often found themselves at the mercy of his vision. A take could stretch for hours if Michael felt it lacked emotion or precision. And sometimes these sessions would test loyalty, patience, and sanity. Yet, for those who persisted, they were rewarded with moments of cinematic and musical brilliance few could ever replicate. But Michael's obsession was not just with others. It was also with himself. He practiced tirelessly, pushing his voice and body to limits most would consider extreme. Injuries, fatigue, and exhaustion were frequent companions, yet they never slowed him. Every performance, every recording, every rehearsal was part of a relentless pursuit of perfection that no audience could ever fully comprehend. And still, the question lingered. In striving for absolute control over music, movement, and emotion, what toll did this obsession take on Michael and those who followed him? The answer was intertwined with the very essence of his genius, hinting at a profound truth about the cost of creating art that would echo for generations. Bruce Swedien often reflected on his decades working with Michael Jackson, and one phrase stood out: the most demanding artist in history. It was not said lightly. It encompassed the countless hours, the obsessive attention to detail, the repeated takes, and the unwavering pursuit of perfection that defined Michael's life. But what made him demanding was also what made him legendary. He pushed boundaries that no one else dared to cross. He demanded that sound, movement, emotion, and vision exist in perfect harmony, and in doing so he redefined what it meant to be an artist. No corner of music, performance, or recording was left untouched by his insistence on excellence. Michael's legacy is therefore twofold. There is the world the public knows, the hits, the videos, the iconic performances, and then there is the hidden world behind them, the grueling perfectionism that made them possible. Every Billie Jean bass line, every Thriller beat, every precise spin in a music video carried the weight of discipline, experimentation, and relentless pursuit of brilliance. Those who worked with him often described a paradox. exhaustion and exhilaration intertwined. They were pushed to their limits, tested emotionally, physically, and mentally, but the result was transformative. Many never worked at the same intensity again, and those who endured discovered something extraordinary: the ability of obsession and genius to reshape human creativity entirely. Michael Jackson's demand for perfection was also deeply personal. He understood that true artistry required sacrifice, not only from himself, but from everyone around him. He knew that the pursuit of excellence could be exhausting, even painful, but he also knew it was necessary for greatness. Every note, every movement, every subtle shift in sound or expression was measured against an ideal that only he could see, and he would not accept compromise. And yet, in this relentless drive, there was profound humanity. Michael was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He demanded perfection because he believed that music and performance could touch lives, evoke emotion, and transcend ordinary experience. The cost was high: long hours, exhausted collaborators, near-obsessive repetition, but the outcome was immortal. His perfectionism was a bridge between the human and the divine, a means of turning ordinary talent into legend. Bruce Swedien, reflecting on decades of collaboration, often emphasized this. Michael's genius could be exhausting, intimidating, even maddening, but it was unparalleled. Every engineer, every musician, every dancer who worked with him was forever changed, witnessing firsthand the intersection of obsession, brilliance, and artistry that defined a legend. And so, Michael Jackson's legacy is inseparable from his demand for perfection. The hits that dominate charts, the performances that inspire awe, the music videos that define an era, they all carry the imprint of a mind that refused compromise. A man who understood that to create immortality, you must endure struggle, obsession, and unyielding attention to detail. As the world continues to celebrate his music, few pause to consider the hidden narrative behind it. The endless takes, the sleepless nights, the tiny inflections scrutinized until perfect. Michael Jackson's greatness was forged in these crucibles of intensity, demanding loyalty, precision, and passion from all who entered his orbit. And so, the question remains: could anyone else achieve what he did? Could anyone else endure, innovate, and transform music in the same way? Perhaps not. Perhaps that is why Bruce Swedien called him the most demanding artist in history, because Michael Jackson demanded not just excellence, but transcendence, and in doing so, became immortal. Even now, decades later, the echoes of his obsession, genius, and perfection continue to influence artists, producers, and listeners worldwide, reminding us that brilliance is never easy, but it is always unforgettable. By the mid-1980s, Michael Jackson's obsession with perfection had become legend. Bruce Swedien, having spent countless hours in the studio with him, knew the reality behind the myth. This was no longer just music. It was a test of human endurance, a crucible of patience, talent, and sheer willpower. Every note Michael sang, every beat he demanded, was a negotiation with the limits of time, human stamina, and emotional resilience. There were sessions that lasted from dusk until dawn, where Michael would insist on repeating a single vocal line dozens of times, adjusting tone, inflection, and rhythm with a meticulousness that seemed almost inhuman. Engineers, musicians, and even Swedien himself often questioned how one man could demand such intensity, and how anyone could endure it without breaking. Yet Michael persevered, fueled by a vision that only he could see and hear. In one particularly infamous session for Thriller, Michael requested a vocal take that would eventually define an entire generation. Swedien recalls that the room went silent after nearly 100 attempts. The tension was palpable. Musicians were exhausted, voices were raw, but Michael remained steadfast. Again, he said, not out of stubbornness, not out of ego, but because he could hear the perfection no one else could. And then it happened. That one take, that single moment of sonic clarity, where every vocal nuance, every rhythmic detail, and every emotional inflection aligned perfectly. The room was transformed. Exhaustion melted into awe. Magic, forged through obsession, had emerged. That take became immortal. It was the moment where Michael's demand for perfection paid off, not just as music, but as an experience that would reverberate across decades. Yet, this brilliance came at a cost. Behind every flawless track lay hours of strain, tension, and near madness. Swedien recalls the delicate balance. Pushing too hard could break the moment, but yielding too much could compromise the vision. Michael's genius thrived in this precarious space between obsession and creation, a place few could enter and even fewer could endure. And the cost was not limited to the studio. Injuries, sleep deprivation, and emotional strain became part of Michael's daily life. Even those who were closest to him felt the pressure of his pursuit. He demanded everything, not just from himself, but from everyone around him. And yet, through this relentless intensity, Michael produced music that was timeless, transformative, and transcendent, redefining pop music and the standards of artistry forever. This was the paradox of Michael Jackson. The higher the demand, the greater the brilliance. The more exhaustive the process, the more immortal the outcome. He pushed beyond human limits, not for vanity, not for recognition, but because the music demanded it. Every note, every beat, every subtle nuance was a step toward perfection, a step toward immortality in sound. And as the final take ended, and silence filled the studio once again, one thought lingered in the minds of those present. Could anyone else survive such perfectionism, and would anyone else ever create music of this magnitude again? For Michael Jackson, the answer was simple. Perfection was not negotiable. It was life itself. Michael Jackson's life was a study in contrasts. The world knew the performer, the entertainer who defied gravity with the moonwalk, who captivated millions with his voice, who created songs and videos that would echo across generations. But behind that public persona was the man who demanded, who obsessed, who pursued perfection with an intensity few could comprehend. Bruce Swedien's reflections offer a rare glimpse into this world. He described working with Michael as both exhausting and exhilarating, terrifying and awe-inspiring. Every session was a test of endurance, creativity, and emotional stamina. Every take, every note, every beat required absolute precision. And yet it was through this demanding nature that Michael Jackson created art that would become immortal. His obsession was not born of ego alone. It was the product of a lifelong pursuit of excellence, shaped by a childhood of discipline, honed through years of experience, and fueled by an unyielding desire to connect with the world through music. Michael believed that every song, every movement, every subtle nuance could touch a listener's soul if performed perfectly, and he refused to settle for anything less than that impact. This is the duality of Michael Jackson, the man who could be gentle, playful and compassionate offstage, yet exacting, relentless, and merciless in pursuit of his artistic vision in the studio. It is the reason he is remembered not just as a pop star, but as a legend, a revolutionary, a force of nature in music history. The hits, the accolades, the records, these are the visible markers of his genius. But the hidden story, the story of long nights, hundreds of takes, painstaking attention to every detail, reveals the true measure of his brilliance. It is a story of obsession, of relentless discipline, and of a mind that refused compromise. And what of those who worked alongside him? Musicians, dancers, engineers, producers, they were all changed by the experience. Some left exhausted, some left inspired, and some never worked at that intensity again. But all carry the imprint of Michael's perfectionism, a reminder that genius is rarely comfortable, rarely easy, and often impossible to emulate. Michael Jackson demanded everything because he believed music deserved nothing less. And through that demand, he achieved what few could: timelessness. The songs, the albums, the performances, they endure not only because of talent, but because of the relentless pursuit of perfection that defined his life and work. As listeners, we often marvel at the finished product, unaware of the human cost, the obsession, and the discipline that made it possible. Every note of Billie Jean, every beat of Thriller, every spin of the moonwalk carries echoes of this pursuit. Proof that greatness is forged in the crucible of relentless dedication. And perhaps this is the ultimate lesson of Michael Jackson's artistry. True genius demands more than talent. It demands obsession, endurance, and unwavering commitment to one's vision. It requires pushing beyond comfort, beyond expectation, beyond the ordinary limits of human ability. Michael Jackson did all of this, and in doing so, became immortal in sound, movement, and spirit. As the world continues to celebrate his music, we are reminded that perfection is not merely about flawlessness. It is about vision. It is about the courage to demand the impossible. And it is about leaving a mark on the world that will never fade, echoing across generations in ways that few can ever hope to replicate. Michael Jackson was demanding. He was relentless. He was exacting. And for that reason, he was unforgettable. He did not merely create music. He created legend. And the echoes of his obsession, brilliance, and perfection continue to inspire, challenge, and awe the world to this day.